All right, here's some help on quiz 1.03. And most of this is dealing with parallel and perpendicular lines. So let's take a look. A parallel line, remember, are coplanar lines that never intersect. And this symbol here is what denotes that two lines are parallel to one another. So look in the figure and let's look at some lines. Let's look at UR. What would be parallel to UR? If we look at UR, we can see that this line is going in the same direction and it's never going to intersect. So when you think about if they're going to intersect, kind of extend the lines out and think, if we keep extending both of those, would they ever intersect? We've got several pairs of parallel lines here. Let's look at this line here. This line here is also parallel to this one. You can see that they are going in the same direction and they are never going to intersect. If this one had been labeled, they didn't label this one, but just to show you, this would also be parallel to this one and this one. They would go in that direction and they would never intersect. The next question is which edges. They give you a rectangular prism and they say which is parallel to IF. So let's take a look at IF. IF is right here. So if we wanted to look at all the edges that are parallel to IF, all the edges of the prism, we might start with this one. That's kind of the most obvious, HE. But then we also have JG here. And then if these are parallel, this one is also parallel. So we've got 1, 2, 3 additional edges that are parallel to IF. Question number 3 is going to ask you what edges are perpendicular to a segment. So let's see, they ask us segment DE. So segment DE is right here. Now, perpendicular, remember the definition, those are lines that meet at right angles. So remember, a right angle is going to be 90 degrees, and we denote that with a little box. So notice that HE is going to form a right angle. We also, if you kind of look sideways here, that EF is also going to form a right angle. So that's at the bottom. And then if we look at the top with DE, we can see that this segment, CD, is going to form a right angle, as well as this segment, GD, is also going to form a right angle right here. Now, number 3, I've just put one of the variations of the quiz on here so I can kind of explain it to you. A lot of students miss number 4 and 5 because they say, well, it looks that way. So they really want you to think about the information that you learned in the unit of how to tell lines that are perpendicular and parallel. So look at what they've given you in the problem. Dakota knows that EJ is perpendicular. That's a symbol for perpendicular to CN. So let's go ahead and kind of mark those. We know that EJ, so EJ is right here, and it's perpendicular to CN. All right, and we know that because they've shown us, they've told us, but they also have given this symbol that that's a right angle. So remember, if we've got this as a right angle, all of these angles here are going to be 90 degrees, right? Just remember that. They're all 90 degrees, and they form right angles. So those two are perpendicular. CN and KT are parallel. So let's denote those in a different color here. So we know that CN and KT are parallel. That's a symbol for parallel. So we know these two are parallel. So let's take a look. What does that tell us? LK, so they're asking us to select each answer. In the OHS, when they say each answer, that means there's usually more than one. So let's take a look. So LK, so here's LK, this line right here, and QT. So a lot of students usually check that correct. It looks like they might be parallel, but you have to go by just the information they've given you. They haven't told us that this angle is 90 degrees. They haven't told us this angle is 90 degrees. And so we can't say for certain that these two are parallel. So that's why that is not a correct choice. EV, so EV is this line here, is perpendicular to KT. So are these perpendicular? They've told us that these two are parallel, and we know that this is 90 degrees, so that's going to also tell us that this angle is going to have to be 90 degrees if these two are parallel. So we do know that they would also be perpendicular. Then they ask here the measure of angle CJV. So CJV is this angle right here, and that equals 90. And we talked about that at the beginning, that if this one's 90, all four of those have to be 90. So we can tell that from the information given. And then EV, so EV is right here. EV is parallel to QT. Well, there again, we know this is 90. We know these are parallel, but we don't know the measure of these angles. So it looks like it may be parallel, but based on what we've been given, we cannot conclude. That could really be an 89-degree angle, and then it would be slightly off, and eventually they would intersect. So that's why those two are not correct answers. The last one is very similar. It wants you to use the image to classify each pair of lines. Okay, so look at our image. All they've told us is this is perpendicular, this is perpendicular, this is perpendicular. So these are perpendicular to the same line. So that was one of the theories in the problem that said if they are perpendicular to the same line, then they must be parallel. So we can look at the figure by what we've been given and say that this is parallel to this is parallel to this. So these three have to be parallel because they are perpendicular to the same line. Okay? That's all we know. So let's take a look at what they've asked us. So AB and CD, we know they are parallel because they are both perpendicular to the same line. AB and EF, same thing. We know they are perpendicular to the same line, so they have to be parallel. IJ and KL. So IJ and KL, we don't know the measure of any of these angles. So we cannot determine if they're parallel, even though they look like they probably are. We cannot determine that. And then CD and GH. So let's look at CD and GH. Okay, now these two, they've given us the symbol that there's a right angle. Because they meet at a right angle, we know that's the definition of a perpendicular line. All right, hope this helps.